For today, I thought we would look at a talk of the Rebbe that really focuses on this idea of coercion, coercing the people of the world to accept God. Is that a valid concept? How does it apply to us and what we do in this world? So where does this all start with? In the Midrash, it states that there's a verse talking about Abraham, and he called the name of God, world. And Abraham looked around and he sees a world of people that are pagan, that are serving idols. And he felt, not enough that I personally know God, that I personally serve God. I have to bring the world to a recognition of God. I have to bring the world to have a relationship with God. So what did he do? Set up hospitality, not an Airbnb, but in the desert, where there's no place to sleep and no good food. He made a very hospitable inn, something he planted an orchard. He had all this delicious food for these weary travelers. And they would come and they would eat and have this great meal in the desert where there's nothing to be had. And then afterwards they'd be like, okay, like, what's the bill? How much do we owe you? And Abraham said, you don't know anything. All this comes from God. Just praise God for giving you all the delicious food. And many of them were like, wow, yes, thank you, God, that you sent Abraham here to give me this amazing food. It really rejuvenated me. Wow, it gave me strength for the rest of my journey. Thank you, God. But others were like, nothing doing. I don't know who this God is of yours, the God of Abraham. I hear you worship a God that you can't see and you can't touch. This is weird stuff. Just give me the bill. I'll just pay. And Abraham said, okay, I think for this meal and this and that, maybe $4,500, so to speak. They'd be, what? That's crazy. Like, what do you mean? You're in a desert. There's absolutely no food. Just imagine I keep my inn in a desert just for you, and I'm preparing this lavish feast, not worth this amount of money. Who else would do it? They're like, but if you want, you can thank God instead. And then they would say, all right, we thank God, the God of Abraham. Thank him for this. Now you look at this incident as it's recounted in the Midrash, and you're like, what's going on? Abraham's not a fool. He was one of the wisest men of all time. I mean, what does he think is happening? With the majority of the people that he tells them, if they pay me, acknowledge God. Okay, we understand. They acknowledge God. They were so grateful. This was such a feast that they had, and they're thanking the God of Abraham that inspired him to make this in the desert. There was some sincerity in their response. But the people that said, we'll pay, we don't want to acknowledge God, it's too much money, we'll acknowledge God. What was that acknowledgement word? Can we even call it lip service, acknowledgement word. But we see Abraham doing it. And God was very, very appreciative of Abraham's efforts. Of course, both efforts with people who responded, we'll call it appropriately, and efforts with people who we would say responded not so appropriately. God was still very, very appreciative. So why? What was it worth? What's going on? So this is the foundation of this talk of Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he really dissects this concept, applying it first how it would be with Jews, this coercion of belief, and then applying it back to the original point with non-Jews. And I thought this would be very appropriate for Noahides to really understand the parameters of this, because, of course, all of us are really trying to reach the world, to bring the world to recognition of God. Now, coercion, where would that even come into play in our reality? But we can leave that discussion for the end. But to what degree can we assume that we should try to influence someone else to acknowledge God on any level? And of course, for Noahides, it's very appropriate to talk about Abraham, as we know that it says that the Noahides in the world are really all descendants of babies that were nursed from Sarah's milk. That when Abraham and Sarah made this party to celebrate the birth of Isaac, of Yitzchak, and many people at that time were mocking, doubting, skeptical of the story that suddenly Sarah at age 90 had a baby when she was childless for all these years with Abraham, who's 100. So it says that God made it that all the nobles that were invited to the party, they all brought their babies, and they all forgot to bring the nursemaids. And then the babies got hungry and there was nobody to feed them. And Sarah said, oh, well, I'm nursing Isaac. I can feed your babies. And she nursed all of those children, proving obviously that this child, Isaac, was her baby, but also doing something very significant spiritually, because all these babies now, they drank from Sarah's milk, and that changed them. That opened them up to Abraham and Sarah's relationship with God, Abraham and Sarah's sensitivity. And every Noahide in the future, every person with having that type of relationship with God descends back one of these babies. So this is an appropriate group to speak about something that happened with Abraham and to understand what that means to us in our reality with the people that we interact with, and to what degree do we need to try to bring them to an awareness of God. So before I start, any thoughts on this? Any people who have really tried to share the truth of God with other people and the responses you've received?
Well, certainly when you tell someone you're a Noahide and they say, "What's that?" Because most people don't know what that is, and kind of
that's a very good conversation opener. I'm a Noahide. Oh, what's that? Great. I'm so glad you asked.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I mean, like it's definitely an interesting conversation where we live in Boise. There's a ton of like very religious LDS folks. There's a ton of very religious Catholics. There's, I mean, an evangelical church, Protestant church on like every corner. So it's a very religious community, which is part of why we love it here. But yeah, there's some mixed reviews.
But you have given this over, and the mixed reviews, some people are like, wow, that's so special. And some people are like, wow, that's so weird.
Basically.
Okay. But you're giving it out there. And I like that. That's a good opener for someone who wants to give over this message to say you're a Noahide. And that's, we'll say, what's that? And then you have all this opportunity to talk to them about it. Anyone else in their efforts or just happened and they're bringing over to other people the reality of being a Noahide?
We actually my husband had a friend come visit from Kentucky this weekend and stay with us. They know each other from back in high school. Well, he is very devout Christian, but he likes to follow a lot of Torah from the aspect of like doing seders, and he really feels passionate about what he calls the Old Testament, but also the New Testament as well. So interesting enough, so he came over for the weekend, and actually there's a large Holocaust museum in the town near us, and so they went and visited that. And then also he was at our house for Shabbat, which he had never experienced. And of course, that opened up a lot of opportunity to have conversations. And then, of course, books throughout the home. I mean, it's the first thing that people usually notice. And so that's always a good conversation starter. Not really sure, I think it was a good experience for him. And I think it's interesting that his family could maybe be going towards maybe the 7 laws, but I think that it was a good experience. So I don't know what I want to exactly say about it, but I just wanted to share that.
What you're saying is that you put it out there, you don't know his response, but he had a lot of time to absorb it. It wasn't peripheral. He stayed by your house for a few days. So he's a religious person and a devout person. So he was thinking about it.
Oh yeah, he was very interested, and he was asking tons of questions and was listening very intently. And of course, James talked to him about certain things quite a bit. And so it was very, very interesting. And he invited us to come visit him. So that's interesting. Well, I guess we would see how that goes, but yeah.
Very nice. God always sends opportunities, and like, who knows what this man and his journey is, and how you were supposed to reach him, and what's going to come.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's some we seek out, some that fall in our lap, and we just keep trying, keep putting it out there, and trust that every one of us is a messenger of God, and we're going to be sincere in our mission, and then God will take care of everything else. We have here, as we said, Abraham's efforts really more than Natalie and Danielle. Didn't just come into his lap, and he made a lot of effort to make it happen. He put a lot of resources and time. I mean, he chose where to live for this mission. And all this in the end, they're like, okay, it's too much money. Fine. Thank you, God. But again, as we said, Abraham was no fool. Now, we can look at this concept again, if this was a Jewish person, and with a Jewish person, now, of course, these people were not Jews. They were the people of the world. The only Jew at that point was Abraham and Sarah. But so it wasn't Jewish people they were doing this for. This was non-Jews. But if we would compare this to Jewish people, we do see with Jews this concept of coercion, meaning, and it's a philosophical question, if you can coerce someone to serve God, is that appropriate? Would you want to do that? I mean, it's coercion. It's not their will at all, but for some reason you can twist their arms and they're going to serve God. And the answer clearly is, yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, we prefer it in a different fashion, but if that's the only way, we'll go for it to the degree. There's a very extreme example in Jewish law of a man who is refusing to give his wife a divorce. Now, Judaism, of course, allows the idea of divorce, so it views it as a great tragedy, but when it's appropriate, it's appropriate. So let's say there was a situation where the courts deemed it appropriate. This woman really needs a divorce. Yes, here the courts are saying she is right, she has to get out of the situation. But the husband's refusing to do it, and in Jewish law, the husband gives wife the divorce. The wife has to get it, but he has to give it. She's willing to take it, but he's not willing to give it. So what do? The courts are saying, no, she needs a divorce. He's saying, I'm not doing it. I don't want to do this. I don't have to do it. I don't want to do it. You can't force me. So what we're told the court does is they beat him until he says, I want to give her a divorce. And then, oh, good. So happy. We also think she should get a divorce. And now we can give her the divorce from your goodwill, and beautiful. And you could say, what's going on here? Again, this looks like a game. He doesn't want to give her the divorce. He doesn't want to get beaten. Just like most people didn't want to acknowledge God. They just didn't want to give money. So what's the court doing? So Maimonides discusses this and says no. Because really inside the Jew, of course he wants to listen to God. And the core of the Jew is his soul. And of course, if a court is saying this woman needs a divorce, then of course his soul is saying, yes, I want to give her a divorce. There's just a lot of mucky baggage wrapping over that inner reality of this person. And that's preventing his real will from being expressed. So when he's being beaten and we can get past all the wrapping, all the thickness and coarseness over his true self, then his true voice can emerge. And that voice says, yes, this is the will of God. This is what the court is saying. I want to give her a divorce. So we do see this concept of very strongly expressed for a Jew. But why is it true for a Jew? And how does it apply for a non-Jew? Because obviously this is talking about Abraham in a world of non-Jews. And again, we're learning in this class because we want to discuss how we are going to deal with the people in our world. So we want to know how this applies to non-Jews. Before doing that, we have to understand that actually what Abraham was doing was so appreciated by God. And there's various quotes that say how God was so grateful to Abraham for doing this for him. As it says that God said, until now, creations didn't know about me. Now, because of this tremendous effort that Abraham did with himself, with his life, with his personal resources, now you made me known by my creations. God was so appreciative. And God says, Abraham, I consider you like my partner in creation. I created them, but they didn't know me. Now they know me because of you. We're partners. Now, when God is saying these beautiful statements, there's no discrimination. I mean, the ones that first time arounders. I mean, the ones that were so happy to acknowledge God, not the ones that did it under coercion. God doesn't discriminate. So we don't either. So that means what Abraham did, including with those people that were so, no way, I'd rather pay, oh, that much money. All right, I'll thank God. God appreciated that as well. Now, it's interesting because this question of what was his point and what did he gain by giving people such an astronomical sum that they just agreed to do it is discussed by many sages. And some say, Abraham said, listen, I'm doing my part. If they're fooling me, so to speak, if they're choosing to say they're acknowledging God, but really they don't, really they mean, I don't want to have to pay money or so much money, that's Abraham's problem. He's doing his end sincerely. If they're not sincere, that's their problem. But it doesn't really seem that that's a good enough answer. Because if that's really what was going on, that Abraham is like fooling himself to be fooled by these people who are being pretty transparent, it's doubtful that God would be so grateful and so appreciative and say, Abraham, you and me, we're partners now in creation. God meant this literally. I created them. You got them to acknowledge me. We're partners. So God somehow is accepting the people that are doing it begrudgingly under financial coercion as still acknowledging him. And that's a very, very interesting point that we want to explore why does God feel there's sincerity in these people that seemingly were not sincere? Or why is God appreciating what they're doing when seemingly they weren't doing anything besides basically saying, well, if it's this, they're paying so much money. All right, I'll say the words. So before we continue, just has anyone had this type of situation, not obviously precisely like this, but where they've spoken with someone about the Noahide laws and the person said sort of nice or neutral things, but you really felt they don't really mean it. They just are saying that, but really they don't mean it. Really, they think we're crazy. Really, they look down on it. But they're just saying polite things because, people nowadays try to be polite. Anyone had such a situation in all their years of speaking to people about Noahides, either because they walk into your home and they wonder where the TV is, or they walk into your home and they see all these books, or they ask what church you go to and you explain you're a Noahide? Anyone have a situation where someone was like sort of saying nice words, but you didn't really think they meant it?
Yes, definitely.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
For sure. Especially with like people we're not very close with that maybe just are stopping by and they see the books or whatever and ask.
And then they say, oh, that's so nice. So how interesting.
Yeah, usually how interesting, that's usually when you're like, oh, okay. You can just tell, or at least I can. I always tell James he's not very good at reading people, but.
So James says, hey, they didn't believe me. But Danielle says, no. That was their way of saying, wow, how weird.
Exactly.
Anyone else have that experience besides Danielle? Like you share what it is to be Noahide and the response you got was like polite, but you didn't really feel very sincere.
For sure.
So did anyone ever have a follow-up afterwards with such a person and actually saw that maybe there was more interest or sincerity than they suspected?
I think when, at least in my experience, not using terms, like not saying things like Noahide or Ger or whatever term you want to use. I'm really just focusing on your connection with Hashem, and then also how important Torah is and why for not only yourself but society and practical things. I think people, I've noticed will connect more to it in like a follow-up conversation. But at least that's been my experience. And I've known a lot of people who are like, oh, that's so interesting. And then they might think about it a little bit. And next time they see you, they want to ask more questions. Like they're interested, like, I was thinking about this. And so I do think overall people are interested, but they might still also be very standoffish about it because they are afraid that
is people that like they're being sort of polite, but then actually when they process it, they actually are sort of intrigued by it and they do want to know more.
Yeah. I've definitely seen that. A lot of the cases for sure. I think at first it's very like, whoa, what is this? That seems kind of odd. I don't want to hear about this. But then maybe when they sit back and think about it, then they're more interested in it.
I'm thinking of a situation, whatever, and something specifically to Judaism where I've worked with some people that also seem, and I'm here with a Jewish thing with Jewish people, but a little bit like, this is so weird, this is so strange, or I don't know about this. But then when sort of challenged or said, okay, you don't really believe in this, you don't really buy this, then they'll be, no, what are you talking about? I think I really take this very seriously. Like almost sometimes people have to act cool. I can't think of a better way to put it. Like, no, I'm cool. I'm not so interested. Oh, you're saying I'm not interested? Of course I'm interested. So sometimes, maybe it is weird. Maybe they do need to process, but maybe they are more interested and they feel comfortable showing. Maybe they don't want to express it. Maybe they don't feel safe expressing it, but
yeah, exactly. Or they're with their spouse or another family member and they're not sure how the other person feels that they should react. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, like they're worried about how the other person might feel about their reaction.
Yes, absolutely. I've definitely seen that. Anyone else? Natanya?
Oh yeah, I don't know how to say this, but yeah, in my experience, it's not more of other people's, beliefs and religions, but I mean, my fellow Noahides, uh, I was really taken aback. I mean, I'm just, I don't know, I'm, really comfortable being Noahide. We as a family, I mean, we're good, we're kind of in a safe zone somehow. But I was, when I went, searching online, looking for other Noahides within the community, at least the online communities, that everyone has their own viewpoints about something, following this rabbi, you should be following this and that, not follow this rabbi. And then my husband and I were talking about it. It was like, I think it's really important that, I mean, I think Noahide in general should really know the laws, should I say the law represented about Shmirat Halashon.
Yeah.
And I realized that in the process, I mean, just for my own,
So you're
reflection
saying
is
you
that,
get more flack from Noahides than from Gentiles that don't yet know they're Noahides.
yeah, it's harder for me to connect with our Noahides in general. I mean, I'm talking. I mean, I have really good Noahide friends. I'm just talking about connecting with more Noahides. And then I realized, quote from the Rebbe is that sometimes it's better to be kind that than to be right, right? So I've noticed that I don't want to debate.
Well, I'm thinking maybe it's sort of like a non-Noahide is going to be polite. They might be very confused or worse than that, but we're trained to be polite to people we're not intimate with. We can be very rude to our friends and family, but other people are polite. So they can be maybe polite, though they think you're crazy. But Noahides, it's more, maybe they're viewing it more like we're all family, and therefore we're not treating each other with the kid gloves we put on for strangers. But
I didn't see it that way.
Say it like we think it, and maybe there's also sort of a lot of passion in terms of each Noahide feeling, or each group feeling, I have the truth, I have the right way, this is the way. If you want to serve God as a Noahide, you got to do it my way. You're not doing it my way. What's wrong with you? So it could just be eliciting more passions and more sense of like, oh my gosh, I got to save you. You got to do it this way because this is the only way to do it, my way. Sometimes, I've seen that dynamic in other groups as well, that with outsiders, they're all polite and nice. And with insiders, they're a little more rough, a little more straight and passionate and rough. But again, hopefully these are all people that do feel like you're part of their family, the family of Noahides. And that's maybe why they're a little more brutal with you than strangers. But I'm sorry you had that experience, because that sounds hard, sounds painful.
Yeah, but having said that, Susan, I have connection with this fellow Noahide. It's amazing. We're having Zoom meetings. At least we're trying our best, every month. It's like seeing your sister. I mean, she's from Winnipeg, yeah, in New Brunswick. Yeah, it's amazing. So it's just that I realized in the process, I'm connecting with online Noahide communities, that everyone has their kind of school of thought. Is that safe to say that? Like Judaism, I think there's a spectrum. And I was like not probably expecting that. I was like, I thought Noahide is like, okay, 7 Noahide laws, but it's not like that. I was like, okay. Then at the same time, it's kind of pushes me to study more, because I cannot say something that I don't know. I cannot say I don't know. I have to get back to you and read something like that. So
you're absolutely right. There's definitely schools of thought within Noahides. There's definitely schools of thought within Noahides, and definitely there's a lot of passion within Noahide community, as I'm sure many of you have experienced. So, but you can see this idea in terms of like reaching out to people, and sometimes they're a little wary, and then maybe they come back, and maybe there's more sincerity. So again, we're going to explore this now, looking at it in terms of Jewish people. And then once we understand the dynamics within roughly reaching out to Jewish people, we're going to say, all right, how does it apply to non-Jews? So within Jewish people, we see this very clearly, that yes, you do this. Like I gave the example of the law that Maimonides explains, And it's a very reputable source, Maimonides, that you literally, the courts beat the man until he says, I want to give this divorce. And we're like, huh? And Maimonides says he does want, his inner will wants. So this force is really saying a person has two levels of will. They have their inner will, and the inner will is to serve God. And they have their outer will that's involved in other things. So when we're putting a pressure, if we go back to Abraham, it was a financial pressure. If we're speaking about this situation with the man and the divorce, it's a literally physical whipping. But those pressures are to like break away the external will. So then the inner will, and the inner will is one with God, can shine. And in the case of this Jewish man being beaten, when he says, I want to divorce her, that is true. Because that is his inner will, because that's what the courts are saying, and therefore that's what God wants, and therefore that is what he wants. Once we beat him enough that the outer will just sort of falls apart. And we see this concept in other things as well. For example, another example is it says that every day a heavenly voice goes out from Mount Sinai and says, woe to the creatures for how they're disgracing the Torah. God says, I gave you this amazing thing called Torah. You're not studying her. What a disgrace. Woe to the creatures they're disgracing the Torah because they're not studying her. And again, you can ask, if you want us to study your Torah, and every day this heavenly voice is emitting from Mount Sinai. Not that my physical ears hear it, but my soul hears it every single day, even if I'm in Chicago. So wouldn't you think the heavenly voice would say, guys, let me tell you how special this Torah is. Torah is God's diary. Torah is God's will and wisdom. Torah is God's secrets. Torah is the most special thing beyond world, within world, through it. You get beyond world. I mean, there's so many amazing positive things to say. Why is this voice in essence bashing us? Woe to these creatures that are so disgracing the Torah, gold ring in the snout of a pig. Like, why are you talking to me like that? But it's a similar concept. God says, I don't have to tell you how wonderful the Torah is. You, on the level of your inner will, of course you want my Torah. Of course you know how special it is. Of course you know how precious it is. If you're not studying Torah, it's because there's junk covering over who you really are. So when I'm going to say this harsh words daily from Mount Sinai, a heavenly voice that penetrates the entire world and every soul hears it, I'm saying these words to crush the stuff covering over your true self. It's like a slap. It's a blow to all those barriers that aren't letting your true self shine. When your true self shines, of course you want to study Torah. I don't have any doubts about that. We see something very similar when in the desert, when the spies gave their report that was saying how scary the land of Israel is, and there's such giants, and we'll never be able to conquer it. All right, over Pharaoh, one king, there's 31 kings in the land of Israel, no way. And unfortunately, most of the men, the women did not, but most of the men believed. And they spent the night crying and saying, oh no, and mourning where they were going. And what was Moses' response? Moses' response was scream at them. Moses' response was tell them what sinners they were. Moses' response was to say how wicked they were for doing this. And you could be like, wait a minute, why did Moses show them a few miracles to remind them how powerful God is, reassure them of God's powers, remember the 10 plagues we all witnessed, God did it then, he'll do it now. Moses screamed at them. And we see it worked. Because after he finished screaming, the Jews were like, oh my gosh, yeah. We're going to go. Let's go conquer Israel. And Moses said, no, sorry, guys, it's too late. God said, nothing doing. You're stuck in the desert for the next 39 years. And they were like, no. And there's even a group of people that did the wrong thing and just tried to push and go to Israel because, of course, they realized how much they believe. And, of course, God can do it. And what happened? They're saying God can't do it. Did Moses show them any miracles of God? No. Did Moses remind them of God's miracles? No. What did he do? He screamed with them. Same idea. Just like beating the man until he says, I want to give the divorce. Just like God's voice berating us from Mount Sinai daily. These people believe. You're total believers in God. If at that moment they were like, no, okay, one king, Pharaoh, he's a pretty tough king, but still one king, 31 kings in Israel, giants that they reach up to the sun with their might. No, this God can't do. That's not their true self. That's not their true voice. Their true voice is an absolute believer. That voice is covered over with garbage. So to get past that garbage, Moses is screaming at them, telling them how wrong it is what they're doing, to smash through that garbage. And once he smashes through the garbage, what emerges is absolute belief. Because of course, underneath it, they believed the whole time. That belief was covered over by the doubts, the worries, the fears, the garbage. When his rebuke, his harsh rebuke, shattered that garbage, what emerged was absolute belief. I'm curious if anyone here has experienced something like that personally, meaning that maybe something was going on in your life, like something that was making you feel less believing and more doubtful or concerned or worried. And then instead of God showing you some wonderful kindness that opened you up or reminded you of your belief, you rather went through something sort of harsh that maybe broke away and some of the stuff you were stuck in. And then what came out was your belief. Did anyone have an experience like that? That maybe, again, it didn't have to be as literally aligned with this example of the spies as I'm saying now, but something that made you less in touch with your relationship with God. And then instead of something warm and loving from God that opened you up and reminded you of your relationship, it was rather something harsh that freed you of what you were going through and your real relationship came out.
I have definitely experienced this, too personal to share, but for sure.
Anyone else? Do you not have to share the details? Has anyone else experienced that?
I have, but I don't want to share the details either. It's not pretty.
You don't have to share details. Okay, so Danielle has and Dixie has, and both of them said it was something they really didn't want to share. Someone's had the other way, where they were going through a time where maybe they were sort of like not feeling their relationship with God, and then God did something nice and wonderful for them, that they really felt God's presence, and that reminded them of their relationship.
Thank God, yes, many times.
Good. I'm glad. Anyone else?
Yeah, there's plenty of those for sure.
Hi, it's Robin.
Yeah, hi, Robin.
Every day.
Every day.
I'm very aware. Every day.
Every day. And you're saying you're aware because of God's warmth and love, or sometimes the harsh?
Yeah, and some things are the other way, where I'm learning to look at it differently and understand it. Maybe not my cup of tea, and maybe it's hard, but I'm learning from it.
So you're saying you also, like Danielle, have experienced both?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, a lot.
So I think for sure the more common way, the way we want, like put it like that, is when God's warmth and love reminds us of his presence. And sometimes, and I'm sure everyone here has had that experience where, whatever you're going through, you might just feel like blah, and your life is blah. So your relationship with God might also feel a bit blah. And then God does something really nice for you, and you just feel like warmed in the glow, and like you just feel, oh yeah, I'm so blessed that I have this relationship with God. And how many of mankind know him, and I'm so lucky and blessed and close. And I'm sure everyone here has had that, and hopefully myriads of times. But sometimes it's the harder times. And there's obviously reasons why that God says, here we need the harsh medicine. Here we need something harsh. And the harshness, again, is like breaking past those false barriers, tearing down the evil that has erected itself around your heart and smashing it. And then when that's gone, what's left is your belief. What's left is your relationship. So again, we're not looking for that harsh medicine at all, but God definitely does it sometimes. And this is why it works. An interesting incident in the Talmud, great sage, Rabbi Lazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, so very, very, very holy, great sage. And he once saw a person who was really ugly. That's how it says in the Talmud. He saw someone very, very, very ugly. And he said, wow, empty one, how ugly you are. Doesn't sound like a very nice thing to say. And then the man responded, well, go tell the craftsman that created me how ugly he made me. So we're like, what in the world is going on? This is a great sage. Now, I mean, obviously all the sages are sages of high caliber, but this one happens to be one of the greatest of the sages. So one of the holiest and greatest of the sages. He lived with his father in a cave for 13 years, subsiding on carobs, and he was so holy. And even after his death, he told his wife, don't bury me. I'm just going to stay in the room and I'll talk to you through the wall. Like, he was so holy. What in the world is going on? He doesn't know that God created every human body. He's bashing a body that God made. Every body is made by God himself. And it's such a rude thing he's saying. He would be so rude. He'd be so rude to God. He'd be so rude to this person. He'd be focusing on his ugliness and he'd be pointing to it. I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so ugly. You are so empty. Like, it seems horrible. And many other questions we could ask along those same lines. As the Lubavitcher Rebbe is understanding this incident, it's exactly the same like the person that needs to give the divorce and being hit by the whip until he says, I want to give it. The type of beating he had was not a whip, so that was probably an incorrect statement, but he was beaten, the man who was beaten, until he said, I want to give it. Or, as we're saying, that heavenly voice that comes out from Mount Sinai and says on a daily basis, woe to the creations, wow, how they are messing up, not studying my Torah. Or after the spies, when Moses, instead of saying God's powers and miracles, is rebuking them very harshly and warning them very harshly of what a horrible evil is now befalling them. So in a similar vein, Rebbe Elazar sees a person who was so ugly and empty spiritually, so empty, so ugly, so far from God. And he knew he had to do something to shake this guy up, to wake him up, to ignite some spark. So he said very, very harsh words to him. Empty one, how ugly you are. To which the man responded, well, tell that to the one who created me. Oh, he achieved his goal. Why did he achieve his goal? Because what he did here was he reminded this person he's a creation of God. He reminded this person he's one of God's handiworks. He reminded this person there's a God who created him and God is responsible for him, and he's turning and acknowledging God. All that was achieved by these very harsh words Rabbi Elazar was saying to this person. So it's just another example of the same concept. We actually see something similar with the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe. There's a story that the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, this was shortly after he became Rebbe, and a person came into him for a private audience, and the person had a tremendous problem. And the Rebbe said he was asking the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe for a blessing. And the Rebbe, who's referred to as Rebbe Rashab, said, can't bless you. Can't bless me. He was crying before, now he's crying and he's crying and he's crying. And the Rebbe's just sitting there saying, can't bless me, nothing doing. He leaves the audience. He feels horrible. He traveled so far. He was so desperate. He put all his hope that the Rebbe will give him this blessing to save him from this horrific situation. And the Rebbe is saying, "I'm nothing I can do." And he is crying and crying and crying and crying and crying and crying and crying. And who walks by but the Rebbe's older brother? Rebbe Rashab was the second son of the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe Marash. The older brother was referred to as the Razah. He was also a very holy person. And the Razah sees this man crying so bitterly, so broken, and till the man notices his presence, and he could talk. And the Razah saying, like, what's going on? Why are you crying like this? And he explained he had this horrific problem, and he had traveled so far at such an expense, putting all his hope in the Rebbe. And now the Rebbe saying, nothing I can do for you. I can't bless you. And the Razah said, let me take care of this. The Razah goes into his younger brother, the Rebbe, and the Razah says, like, what are you doing? No, the Rashab was just a new Rebbe at that time, so the Razah could talk to him like this, or felt he could at any rate. Well, what are you doing? This isn't what our father did. If someone came for a blessing, you give him a blessing. And the Rebbe said, oh, okay, yeah, you can tell him to come in, I'll bless him. Oh. So the Razah goes back and he said, okay. The Rebbe said, he'll bless you. Oh, He goes in, he gets a blessing, and the blessing materialized, and the whole thing worked out beautifully. So again, what's going on here? Yes, he was a new Rebbe, but he's a Rebbe. He knows what he's doing, even though he was young and new, fresh, newbie Rebbe. He's a Rebbe. What's going on? He didn't know to bless a Jew. He didn't know to bless someone in such distress. What's going on? And then when his brother said to me, he's like, oh yeah, you're right, I'll bless him. What's going on? And the blessing was fulfilled and the salvation happened. So it was going on, in a sense, something very similar. When this person came into him for private audience for a blessing, the Rebbe looked at him and was like, no, he's not holding there. Of course I could give a blessing. But it's not going to happen. The blessing is like water. You have to do your part. You have to plow the ground. You have to till the ground to be open to receive the waters of the blessing, that some beautiful salvation will flower, will sprout, will take root. And the Rebbe looked at this person, and he's a Rebbe. He understood he wasn't holding there. Yeah, he was relying on the Rebbe, but he wasn't holding there personally. The Rebbe could give him beautiful blessings, but it'll be water falling on untilled soil. Nothing would grow. So the Rebbe pushed him away and said, can't help you. In other words, you better start turning to God. And when he went out in the hall and he was crying and crying and crying and so broken, he was turning to God because he saw the Rebbe was there, nothing I can do. At which time the Raza passed by, and then he went in, and the Rebbe knew, okay, yeah, I sense it. Now he's ready. Now he's turned to God. Now he's truly broken himself. Now he's truly made himself that plow soil, so my blessing, the water will come and something beautiful will flower. And that's exactly what happened. He gave him the blessing, and the salvation happened because he was so broken by the harshness of the Rebbe saying, nothing I can do. And he was so broken open by that his real inner relationship to God, his real inner belief in God and trust in God and knowing it was only God came out, and now the blessing could happen. So these were many different examples. Again, we spoke about the man not wanting to get the divorce, the heavenly voice going out daily from Mount Sinai till today, the Jews after the sin of the spies, Rabbi Lazar and that very spiritually ugly person, and this incident with the Rebbe Rashab and the man who he said he couldn't bless. So the Rebbe brought 5 different examples that are all expressing the same point. Yes, what Abraham did, we see works for Jews. Abraham was doing it for non-Jews. For Jews, we see it works. Because again, inside there's this pure, godly soul, and they're just covered over by whatever the specific situation is. And the harshness cracks through all that. And what's inside comes out, and it's pure and beautiful and good and God. But of course, it also works somehow for non-Jews, because Abraham was doing it for non-Jews. And obviously it works for Noahides, as Danielle and Dixie personally experienced. But then we want to understand more what's happening with the non-Jews. Natalie, you had something you were going to share?
It took me a minute as you were talking to think about it. And I was actually thinking about this the other day. So it's kind of funny. Just talking about kind of the harshness, but then also a blessing. After we had our 2 boys, we were we really wanted to try for a girl. And so we had done what our midwife had suggested in terms of I hear you here, Nugget. Sorry, she's crying. So we were doing all of the timing and food and all kinds of things to try and have a girl next. It took us 6 months to get pregnant that time, which for us was a long time. And then about the 14-week ultrasound, we found out that we had miscarried. And it was quite devastating, because it had been such a long time at that point. And I mean, I think a miscarriage is always devastating. And then after that, we basically had said, never again. We're not going to monkey around with this. God's going to give us what he's going to give us. We're not going to try and control it. And then thank God we were pregnant again, not that long after, and we had Isaac. What was funny was when he was about 9.5 months old, we were definitely not trying. we were trying to not. It was, we wanted more kids, but not that soon. And then when we found out we were expecting, it was a huge shock. And now we have our little girl, and now we have a girl. And what's really funny is like both of those babies were due in July. So it's like, it was definitely all in his timing. I was thinking about that the other day. I'm like, well, it's 2 years later, but we got our July girl, just not the way that we thought.
The way that God planned, the better way. Yeah, it's harsh and it's real, and you got what you want at the right moment. Everything is timing, God's timing. Everything is timing. Wow. We should all merit to see God with kindness and compassion.